Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage, Gaétan Houle.
Good evening. A couple of years ago, I went to a Montreal hospital for a cataract surgery. I learned then that they don't put you to sleep for these types of operations. So anyways, I'm walking into the operating room, and I notice on the right, there's this robot standing right next to the operating table. All right, never seen one of those before. It was a big German name in big letters printed in there. Anyway, so the ophthalmologist welcomes me, and she starts explaining to me how the operation is going to work. She said, at some point during the operation, you're going to hear me give commands to the robot, who's going to make a very accurate incision in your cornea. This is going to allow me to remove the damaged lens from your eye and put a new artificial one in it. And you're not going to put me to sleep for this. Oh, no, don't worry, she says. You're not going to feel a thing. The trick is to keep your mind busy during the operation. So, okay, so here I am laying down on the operating table thinking, all right, a French-Canadian doctor giving English command to a German robot. What could possibly go wrong? So then I got thinking, like this was in 2023, and I don't know if you remember that year, in Ontario alone, 5 hospitals were victims of a major cyber breach. Hundreds of thousands of personal records were compromised. Treatment to patient was disrupted. So I came to the conclusion that a cyber attack is probably more likely to disrupt my operation than the doctor making a mistake or the robot somehow malfunctioning. So why am I telling you this story? Like Gaétan, get to the point. I'm telling you this story because it illustrates a truth that we rarely talk about these days. Is we've built a digital nation that relies a lot on critical infrastructure, but we have not put enough emphasis to secure them. So I've been in cybersecurity for over 40 years, and I've noticed a pattern that is pretty clear. In the government, the lower you go down in the hierarchy, the less resilient to cyber attacks we are. And hospitals are a very good example of that reality. So today, I will highlight some of the vulnerabilities that we have with our digital infrastructure, but we'll also call for bold action to protect our people, protect our systems, and protect our data sovereignty. These points, in my opinion, are key components to making a Canada future ready. So, all right, let's start by what our governments are doing. Over 20 years ago, for some of you guys who were here, each federal department was doing its best to try to protect itself from cyber attacks. But in 2011, Shared Services Canada was created, and what they did is they centralized and regrouped all the scarce talent in cybersecurity that we had, and instead of having each department working on its own silo to try to protect itself, Shared Services Canada did it for everyone. 43 departments and crown corporations. They did it much better than having each department try to do their work on their own. So if I had to give them a report card, I'd give the federal government an A. All right. 7 years ago, the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity was created. That's our elite cybersecurity agency in Canada. I don't know if you knew this, but they're considered amongst one of the best in the G7, despite their small size. Having access to the Five Eyes cyber threat intel from the US, the UK, Australia, and New Zealand, they've been able to develop and they keep maintaining a very accurate database of that we call known malicious IP addresses. And they call that database Aventel. As a matter of fact, they use that database to protect federal departments against cyber attacks. And it's very, very efficient. And that's part of their partnership with Shared Services Canada. So in their report card, I give them an A+. All right, let's talk about provincial governments for a moment. Provincial governments, they take care of our hospitals and our power utilities. Very few of them have implemented a shared services model, which means that all the others are relying on their departments to defend for themselves. All they do is issue policies and guidelines, and that's it. So not surprisingly, at the provincial levels, the number of severe cyber breaches is much higher. To give you an example, last year, the Department of Justice in Manitoba was breached. This past June, the Nova Scotia Power was breached. And just a few months ago, over 20 schools in Ontario were victims of a cyber attack. Each time, this has major implications for the population. So for that reason, provincial governments get a C- in their report card. All right, let's talk about municipalities. Municipalities face an even bigger challenge. You know why? 90% of them only have 5 employees or less. Imagine. So these are the people responsible for your property taxes, your water treatment facility, and in some cases, your local transit systems. These people have no choice. All the specialized work, they have to subcontract it to the lowest bidder without any consideration for cybersecurity because they don't know any better. So municipalities, on top of that, are constantly targeted by ransomware. So if you take a moment, if you want to know how bad it is, go on the internet, do research on the number of Canadian municipalities that have been victims of cyber attacks in the past couple of years, and you'll be as shocked as I have been on how long the list is. So for that reason, they get an F in their report card. What about the average Canadian? I don't know if you knew this, but over one third of all traffic on the internet is considered malicious. 1/3. And in 2023, Statistics Canada published a report saying that each year, Canadian companies spend over $1 billion just to recover from cyber attacks. Imagine if that money was reinvested into being more productive and so on, or into innovation. But the bottom line is that small and medium businesses simply do not have the resources or even the know-how to protect against sophisticated cyber attacks. All right, so enough of the bad news. Let's go back to the objective of this presentation. What can we do to make Canada future ready? So I don't know if you knew this, but telecom companies have the capability to block all known malicious traffic coming to this country today using their existing equipment. As a matter of fact, in 2022, the CRTC asked the telephone companies to do exactly that, but nothing happened. Why is that? The answer is simple: liability. In their directive, the CRTC had asked the telecom companies to each develop their own database of malicious IP addresses and use that to block traffic coming into the country. But what if they made an error and ended up blocking somebody by mistake? they could get sued. And that's why they refused to implement the directive from the CRTC. Simple as this. But hey, wait a minute. Hey, why don't they use the Avantel database developed by the CCCS, the Canadian Center for Cybersecurity? CRTC, during the consultation, they reached out to the CCCS and said, listen, could we use your Avantel database and share it with the telecom companies to relieve them of any legal liabilities, and also to eliminate all this duplication of effort, because each telephone companies had to work in their own silo to try to develop their database. The answer that they got from the CCCS was, sorry, this is not part of our mandate. I'm not making this up. This was in the minutes of the consultation meetings that the CRTC had with all kinds of stakeholders. So as you can see, adding an additional layer of cyber protection to all Canadians is not a technical matter. It's a leadership matter. After all, we have all the ingredients to make it happen. We have an elite cybersecurity agency. We have access to Five Eyes threat intel, very detailed, very reliable. We have a manageable size of telecom companies, and we have all kinds of talent to make it happen. So, the way I see it, we have two options. Option one, we ask telecom companies to offer an additional layer of cybersecurity protection to all Canadians, free of additional charge, by leveraging the Avantel threat database to their existing infrastructure. That's option one. Option two, we do nothing, because that would require to update somebody's job description in Ottawa. All right, so in your opinion, we have a Prime Minister who's traveling the world, trying to move the needle for Canada. If he were made aware of these two options, which one do you think he would choose? So let me get back to you in a minute on how we're going to bring this matter to the attention of our Prime Minister. So far, I've talked to you about risk related to cybersecurity, but there are other risks that we rarely talk about. And it's the risk of foreign governments legally exfiltrating data from our computer systems in Canada. We live in a world where most of our data is in the cloud. That makes our data vulnerable to not only hackers, but to laws that we do not vote for from countries that we don't live in. So this is cybersecurity meeting data sovereignty. Doesn't matter how many firewalls you have or how many endpoint protection system you have. At the end of the day, if your data is stored on a computer system that is managed by a foreign entity, your data is at risk of being exfiltrated. Okay, I can see some of you guys are looking at me like, what the hell is he talking about? Let me give you some context here. Where were you on September 11, 2001? Personally, I was watching the news in my living room in Ottawa, and when I saw the Twin Towers collapse, I figured, all right, I think we are officially at war against terrorism. Many pointed the finger at the US intelligence for failing to see the event coming, so the US government enacted the Patriot Act. That law gives US authorities broad powers to have access to data stored on any US computers located in the United States. This was the year of 9/11, and most Canadians looked at this, I guess, yeah, it's for a good cause, so we didn't mind. Okay, put that aside. Where were you in January 2017. This is the time where El Chapo Guzman, drug lord, was finally captured and extradited to the United States after 25 years in being in pursuit. A lot of people ask, well, why did it take so long? Turns out, most of the delays were caused by waiting for authorization from the Mexican government to have access, for the intelligence people to have access to the computer networks and to be able to intercept communications. So because of this, a year later, 2018, the US government came up with the Cloud Act, which essentially gave the authority to US government to force any US company to hand over data on the systems that they manage, regardless of where these systems are physically located. So for example, Amazon or Microsoft, they could receive a court order saying, give me all the information you have about Gaétan Houle on your computer systems in Toronto or whatever, and they would have to oblige. Canadians being Canadians, it was for a good cause, drug trafficking, so we didn't mind. So let me ask you a third question. Where were you January 20th, 2025? This is when Donald Trump was sworn in as President of the United States. And the drastic change that his administration brought in, all of a sudden, our Canadians are asking questions. For example, are the Cloud Act and Patriot Act limited to the fight on terrorism and fight on drug trafficking? The short answer to that question is no. These laws can be invoked to support any criminal investigations in the US. Ooh, okay. But how often does the government in the States use these laws to exfiltrate data from our computers in Canada? Good question. Unfortunately, we'll never know the answer because by law, the government is not required to tell us. And I have done research, there's no public record on that to be able to answer that question. So all of a sudden, Canadians are concerned. And they want to know, what can we do? Well, there are a few things we can do, again, to try to make Canada future ready. First of all, don't put all your eggs in the cloud. I mean, I talk to some people, we're 100% in the cloud. Okay, then you're 100% vulnerable. Okay, so a lot of people now are using a hybrid environment. Some stuff in the cloud, some stuff on-premise. And on-premise, it could be in your own company, or it could be with a Canadian cloud service provider. So that will help, again, to keep your sensitive information on-premise a bit more protected from the reach of the Cloud Act. Second thing you can do is when you buy cybersecurity equipment to protect you, whether it's a firewall, a switch, whatever, it comes by default with encryption keys that are accessible by the manufacturer, which means that if that manufacturer receives a court order to decrypt the information and exfiltrate data, they have to comply. But most of these companies, they'll offer you the option of using your own crypto key to encrypt and protect your data, which means that if they receive a court order, they would not be able to decrypt the information and you would be protected. The other thing you could do is segment your network. Okay, you have your cloud in there, and you have your on-premise stuff. Make sure you use firewalls in the middle to control what comes in, what comes out. And finally, sit down with your lawyers and review your existing contracts with your cloud service providers and see what could be done to protect yourself from the reach of the US Cloud Act. All right, so that's on the data sovereignty side, but we need clear actions to make Canada more resilient to cyber attacks, which is why we need to push to have an extra layer of cybersecurity protection for all Canadians. So, if you know people of influence in Ottawa, speak up. If you know people in the telecom industry, raise the issue. And if you happen to know how to raise this matter to the attention of Nathalie Drouin, she happens to be our Prime Minister's National Security and Intelligence Advisor, please let me know, because I would really like to have a chat with her. All right, so if I may conclude, by the way, my operation went very well. I was lucky. There was no cyber attack when I was on the operating table. That being said, being lucky should not be Canada's national strategy. It's, I know it's difficult, but things are changing so fast right now. Quite frankly, I think we're struggling just to keep up. So being aware of the risks that I've mentioned is one thing, but it's going to be essential to actually come up with bold actions if we want to be able to move the needle and have a Canada that it can be future ready. Thank you for your attention.